Hello, everyone, and hello, Shatakshi. Welcome to this third episode of the Shatakshi show. Today, we're going to be discussing very exciting topic, climate change, and very relevant given last updates from COP26 in Glasgow. But first, let me ask Shatakshi, how are you?
I am doing really good, Carolina, taking over from our last conversation. It is snowing right now. So while it was raining as we were speaking last time, it's a very beautiful space out here. So thank you so much for asking. How are you doing?
I'm also good. I'm also doing great. Thank
Lovely.
you so much for
And
asking.
you have a birthday of a friend coming up?
Yes, tonight.
If I may ask, do you want to share the name of that person? Whose birthday is it? Are you excited to attend?
Sure. So my friend's name is Zhang. Today is actually not her birthday. It will be her birthday in a couple of weeks. But as we're all going back home, we wanted to surprise her with a pre-birthday dinner. So a few friends are coming over. She's actually my roommate, so I'll have to arrange everything for her.
Good luck with that. Very nice. And when do you head back to your home, Carolina, to celebrate Christmas?
So I'll go back to Milan on Sunday, which is in 5 days.
This Sunday. Okay. Excited? Not excited?
Very excited.
Very nice. Yeah. That's really lovely. We got this really cute Christmassy tree in our home as well.
Yes.
Just getting the entire... Go ahead.
In fact, I was saying the Christmas tree behind your back is amazing, and it's really making me even more excited to go home and celebrate.
Yeah, just getting the entire vibe up of Christmas. All right, excited to talk about climate change. Tell me what's on your mind today.
Sure. As a first question, I think, as I mentioned, I think the interest in focusing on climate change for this episode really came from the recent updates from COP26. So I'd like to start from a question that I got from some news that I read from there. So I read that at COP26, China said that various countries' efforts to meet the 1.5 degrees target should be seen in the context of their efforts to eradicate poverty, and India, in fact, agreed. But how do you think India can decarbonize its economy by 2050 while addressing issues like poverty, like India mentioned, and unemployment to ensure that its future economy is also socially resilient and inclusive?
It's a really great question, and a question I would say where I have real life experience. So it's very interesting that my first project in my career, Carolina, was actually around solar. We were trying to electrify a village in Uttar Pradesh. Pradesh is actually a northern state in India. And what was really very exciting was that village had never seen electricity before. And I still remember, and that was actually the project which tilted me a little bit towards social impact, because we went on ground and we wanted to electrify. And I remember this 80-plus-year lady coming on up to me and saying with a lot of enthusiasm, "You are going to electrify our village. Is that for real?" And I still remember that face. And I think that entire energy that there was going to be electricity run by solar was just so real. That emotion was so real, because that grandmother was excited for her grandchildren that they would be able to study now with the lamps and the lights. Now, fast forward to, I would say, 2019. This is a year when I was working with BCG. I mean, we were working with a shipping case, entire shipping industry. And my peers were actually working on really interesting pieces such as cost optimization, reducing the time to delivery, last mile delivery, etc. I was really lucky to be working on climate impact and environmental impact, because a lot of people do not, shipping is actually one of the major contributor to the entire carbon emissions. And what we realized, if I were to synthesize that entire topic, was solar actually plays a very, very important role. So kind of taking a full circle, having worked in climate impact and energy for a couple of times, and there were multiple projects in between as well, solar has been and will continue to be the strength of India. So answering your question, how will India actually achieve this? from these micro stories to at a macro level, India has plans to actually leverage renewables, and renewable I mean wind energy, which could be leveraged as an asset down south in India, and then of course the renewable and of course the solar. It's an asset, and an asset that we can definitely leverage. So the plans of the country is to leverage 50% of an energy consumption from renewables. So that's point number one. But that leaves another 50% of the bucket still unanswered, right? How would we eventually figure out the leftover, the 50%? People are talking about hydrogen, people are talking about EVs. To my mind, hydrogen as energy is still going to take some time in terms of the innovation that has to take place, the cost optimization that has to occur. At the same time, I think after renewables, right, if there is another parameter which can really transform the space, has to be around EVs. So these are largely the 2-3 ideas because of which I genuinely believe that India can achieve the targets that it has. And having worked in close quarters with the government, I have noticed that these are not false plans, these are not false goals. The government has mandate, and they're trying their best to make sure that the entities, the private organization, the investors, the non-profits, the communities, they're all coming together at a single platform, and the goals are achieved. So that's point number one. I think you asked a really good question around the poverty elimination and making sure it's done equitably, right? And it's kind of a similar conversation. We could have a similar conversation around it on a similar day. Hey, we are talking about artificial intelligence, but what about the jobs that are taken away because of artificial intelligence, right? And similar argument could be made here. What about all those people who are employed in oil and gas? And what about all those people who are employed in coal as an industry? I think largely it is not really impractical. What we could do is there is going to be dearth of people at the bottom of the pyramid when you shift the innovation from coal and oil and gas to these solar plants and to these wind plants as well. What may be really very good would be if there are mandates that you need to make sure that the new plant that you're setting up, be it of renewable energy, it employs people, probably certain percentage of it who are coming from the coal and oil and gas, making sure there is no unemployment in the industries which are going to become outdated in some time. It's more about the mandate, it's more about the plan, but at the same time, execution has to happen very, very strictly. My key thing or my key insight after working in this sector is all the stakeholders have to work together. The investors, the non-profits, the advocates, the young advocates, and the governments, they cannot just afford to work in silos. And of course, that's why platforms such as COP26 come in really, really handy because they help everyone align together. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And that was a very interesting answer. And in fact, because you just mentioned about how different stakeholders should come together, I'd like to just, I guess, shift our attention from what a government can do. In this case, it was to what businesses can do more generally. It's often said climate change is often defined as a major risk for businesses, but some define it as also an opportunity. Where do you agree with the former or the latter? And if you think that climate change can be an opportunity for businesses, then how can it be, according to you?
It's a really, really great question, Carolina. One where I think the best firms, for example, BCG, I think BCG left a very strong impact on me in terms of trying to convince the clients that, hey, this is a big deal. And while you're trying to improve profits, while you're trying to improve market capitalization, this is also a very important question to ask. There were a few clients which are at the top of the pyramid, which were asking these questions themselves. And coming back to while I was working with Tony Blair in the Middle East, we were asking governments actually in Middle East, right? They are the ones which are heavily responsible for oil export and oil production, right? In fact, Saudi has committed for carbon neutrality in 2015, which is one of the oil producing nations. So we were actually pressurizing and asking the right questions to all these Middle East governments as well. Largely, I would say it's an opportunity for the long term. And that's why anyone who is playing a midterm or a short-term game will not value this more. And the case in point of this entire long-term game would be of Patagonia, right? I think there are two advantages that a firm could take when they are actually focusing on climate impact. The number one is the resilience that you build in your supply chain, the innovation that you do. Having worked in close quarters with these clients, with these governments, we have noticed the kind of efficiency, the productivity enhancement, and the resilience that you can build. Take a case in point of, so basically what happens in Middle East, especially in areas such as Iraq, where there are terrorist activities. The number one way in which a terrorist would actually, or a terrorist group would actually dismantle an entire community is by attacking the power supply. So, for example, the telecom towers, etc., they would be blasted up. Now, there is this entire concept of resilient infrastructure. What do I mean by resilient infrastructure? If you have these decentralized solar power plants, right, you could actually blast that entire central power plant. But if you have decentralized solar power plant concept, similarly for water pump, then there is an entire resilience that is built in the supply chain. And that can happen if at a micro community level, that can happen actually at a larger organizational levels as well. So that is one advantage. I mean, you and I can go on and critique this argument as well, but Shatakshi, there is one more loophole in the argument. Where would the cost come from, etc.? But those are level two questions. The level one is that you're not just relying all your resources in one thing, and that's another thing that I want to talk about, the decentralization over the centralization. I think the world is moving more centralized in terms of supply chain, especially because of what has happened because of pandemic, right? And no one is right or wrong. When you had to get your material from China and the entire borders are seized, I remember when I was in BCG, as a consumer, as my story was, I wanted a new laptop, and legitimate, because the borders were closed, I could not get a new laptop. And here was I, a consultant who was charged phenomenally by the client, and my laptop wasn't working. And that's why markets are becoming more inward and markets are becoming more centralized. But the larger idea has to be around decentralization through these renewables, and that will actually enhance your innovation and your productivity measures. That's point number one that I would say is on the supply side. I think there is this entire demand side as well, which is around advocacy, which is around smart consumers understanding, well educated consumers understanding that, hey, we don't want fast fashion like H&M, we don't want fast fashion like Zara, we want Patagonia, because the 80% of the proceeds, in fact, if I'm not wrong, the entirety of their Black Friday sale that they actually collected is going to go for climate impact causes. I'm going to relate with those brands more. In fact, that happened with Tesla as well, when Elon Musk actually announced on a meeting call, similar like you and I are having a chat, that I don't care about stock market, I care about making this world a much more sustainable and less carbon emission place. The stock market actually went up, which is very counterintuitive. You're telling these stockholders that I don't care about you, but eventually stockholders were reading something more fundamentally, that this guy is building a much more fundamental business. So that's why I take a full circle and I say that the long-term game is way more important. People who are just trying to get into a business to make quick money because there is a fintech wave going on, because there is an edtech wave going on, they will not focus on it. And that's why the larger players, the big market cap players, will have to actually lead the entire bandwagon and say that, hey, we are here to make sure things are sustainable. Adani has, for example, has an Adani Green. There are ports which are actually completely renewable. People question firms from big houses such as Adani Green in India for being highly capitalist, for whatever motivation they have. But it is one of the private ports in India which is almost completely running on renewable energy. And that gives inspiration and a best practice to other government-run ports in India as well. So a complex situation, but the answer is pretty neat. Anyone who's playing a long-term game, anyone who's just trying to make quick money, would want to focus on climate impact if he or she is in her right minds. That's what my response would be.
Thank you for that. I've talked about governments and we've talked about businesses, and I'll now end, as always, with millennials and millennials' engagement in the fight against climate change. I know that we'll be the ones who will bear the burden of climate change, yet we many times feel unable to influence change in a meaningful way. How do you think, in general, can tomorrow's leaders help tackle climate change today?
It's a really good question, because then it comes back to, I suppose there will be viewers who will be watching this and they would be like, Shatakshi, all this jargon and all this jazzy shit about COP26 and World Economic Forum is cool, but what do I do about it? I'm really passionate. And I've seen this with GGI fellows and GGI scholars as well. I'm really passionate to contribute to this space, but I don't know how. I think the answer is in twofold. The first one is just upskilling. I think people know about the entire space, but they don't know about the nitty-gritties of it. For example, the entire climate impact space is divided into two parts: adaptation, mitigation. What do you really think is mitigation beyond than just reading the intuition of this word? What is carbon abatement, right? What is carbon capture, etc., etc. So, and that's why, for example, you and I both know at GGI there is no management consulting masterclass. It's management consulting and sustainability. I think BCG largely left a very important and a big impact on me, because we signed for carbon neutrality in 2030 as a business model. When you have to fly your consultants, right? It's a big commitment to have, because you are going to say certain things as no to your employee family, because you're not going to make them fly as often as they would like to, perhaps, right? So that entire thing left a strong impact on us to eventually make GGI not just a capitalist organization, and I always say a responsible capitalist organization. So upskilling is really important, because being passionate about a topic and knowing that enough to contribute in this sector is very, very different things, right? Know what are the industries that are highly contributing to the entire carbon emission. How do you mitigate? How do you adapt? What are the organizations that are working in this entire space? I recently know of a GGI fellow. Her name is Swasti. She was actually employed in Deloitte, and she recently joined a very large think tank in US, and she's going to be working on climate impact. So what I'm trying to say is, you can just be curious that I want to contribute to this space, but you cannot contribute till the time you're upskilled enough. So that's point number one. Point number two is definitely around advocacy, right? What are your opinions? Are you sharing those opinions? Are you creating pressure point on the government, especially in free markets economies like US and India? You can definitely create pressure point on the ecosystem. Greta Thunberg is doing that at her age. If she can do it, why can't we? And I think third thing is, the economy is changing. We cannot just be dependent upon leaders that they are going to provide us opportunities. I think there was this, if I'm not wrong, high school student who built some e-rickshaw or an innovative solar model, and she was really appreciated at COP26. Let's not wait for someone else to really provide us an opportunity. Why don't you create your own opportunity? Startups are flourishing, opportunities are being respected. The entire social media age is making sure that not just Tom Cruise and Megan Fox of the world are celebrated. True heroes from ground up are actually getting celebrated because of this entire innovation startup culture. So it's a food for thought. But if I'm really very passionate, then I would definitely make sure that I'm upskilled in this entire industry, even if I have to actually launch my own venture. And point number two is, be an advocate of change. I know of friends who are working in IFC and World Bank. Even though they're actively working in this entire climate impact space, they actively write on LinkedIn because they're passionate about it. They just don't want their work to make the impact. They want everyone to know about that advocacy and that change. And last but not the least, you could be the leader who could drive this change, then wait for someone else. I hope that answers the question, Carolina.
It does, and it was a really inspiring answer for me, and I'm sure for everyone else in the audience. So really, thank you for that. I think that was it from my side. Thank you again for our chat today. It was really great. Do you have any final words for us today?
It was honestly a very great chat having with you, Carolina. I think largely my final words would be, climate impact is still a niche. There are still people who are calling it a hoax. And only time, I don't think time will tell. I think this thing is really clear. I've told you I'm in New Hampshire, and the natives of New Hampshire would actually say that it used to snow starting October, and now it is snowing probably in December. So these things are very real. And in terms of creating that 1.5 degree change, it's hard thing to do, but we all need to do that. That's would be my last stance.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for our chat.
All right. Yes.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Subscribe right now so that you get notified every time, every day, whenever I'm putting up my videos on career advancement, personal finance, and lots of productivity hacks.